That means all of that knowledge that your elders have about, if you have a grandparent who was brought up doing segregation, if a grandparent who's seen like, or a parent who fought in, if it was African American, who fought in foreign wars and did all these things, whatever. The knowledge that they've accumulated over the years is like a library. Like when you go to talk to I figure your parents are probably pretty young. You go talk to your parents. Your parents are gonna be able to tell you stuff that you wouldn't be able to fathom, but you're at your age. To you, that's a wealth of that's information that you can use. Now, you see a lot of people. I don't know if you guys watch the news or if you do social studies in school or whatever, but you see a lot of people talk about how this type of history is irrelevant. It's not important or whatever. That is a big falsehood. Don't fall into that trap, because if you forget or neglect to learn it, you won't to know the history. You won't be able to avoid it in the future. You won't understand you will not be able to appreciate the sacrifice that the people before you put in. Okay, you guys came down here from what? From the Western Shore, right?
Baltimore.
From Baltimore.
Ohio. In Cleveland.
In Cleveland. There was a time that you, because of the complexion of your skin, would have not been able to travel freely here. You could have been stopped. You could have been kidnapped. You girls, that unspeakable things could have happened to you. The phone that Kim is holding. Hold your phone up, Kim. There was a time that technology existed. You wouldn't be allowed to have it. You would be banned from having that. It'll be like catching a black person. They'll be probably catching a black person with a cell phone. At one time in history, if they existed, would probably been as bad as catching an African with a firearm. You know what I'm saying? So these things are you have to learn these things. You can't let anybody tell you, oh man, nobody want to hear nothing about that slavery stuff, man. That's a history that you have to know. You have to learn it because slavery still exists. Yes, it does. Truthfully, they never really got rid of slavery. All they did was open it up. If you learn about the 14th Amendment, says that nobody can be enslaved unless incarcerated. That means that not now you can still be enslaved, but it also means white people can be enslaved too by committing a crime. So anytime that you commit a crime, you are putting yourself on the auction block for slavery. It's in the Constitution. No, it's in the mind.
It's also what you invest in. You look at probably 99% of everything we consume is not made by us. You depend on something from somebody else that don't love you. The money in your pocket still has the faces of our enslavers on it.
Well, that's a slippery slope. We want to have that conversation because then that would take us into Martin's comment of I'm leading my people into a burning house. Yeah. We're talking about integration. Integration destroyed a lot of African businesses and a lot of African communities. So when you get into that might be a little bit too much for them right now. That's a slippery slope.
They building jails based on the test scores of third graders. It's not too early.
That's right.
Yeah. But think of this. Look at it like this. You know how you walk into a library and there's thousands of books. Consider yourself a library. Get as much information as you can, and as the old folks would say, put it back here for safekeeping. And now, as far as Frederick Douglass goes, you guys here on the Eastern Shore is like what I consider like the Mecca of Black history. Once you cross that bridge, you stepped on holy ground. You have Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, William Highland Garnett, William Steele. You got
Green. Sam Green.
Sam Green. Speaking of Sam Green, when Harriet first ran for freedom, the first place she went was to Reverend Green's house. Why did she go to Reverend Green's house? I don't expect anybody to get it right because you're not going to find it in a book. You'd have to be a member of the family to know. So, I gonna take a guess though. Does anybody know who Sam Green was?
I believe she wanted the connections, right? I remember her going there to talk to him. Right. She went there to talk to him.
In order to be transported to her.
That's not even really. That's not even really why.
You know that's what they show you.
That's what he was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, but that's not why she immediately ran to him. Does anybody know who Harriet's mother was?
Yeah,
Who Araminta's mother was? What was her name?
Harriet.
What was her last name?
Ross.
What was her maiden name?
Floyd.
Connect the dots now.
Mm.
Green.
Yep.
So that was her first husband.
No.
Oh.
It was family.
Okay.
He was a family member who happened to be a conductor on the Underground Railroad.
I see. Okay. Well, y'all are gonna see tomorrow. You'll see that very church, the one that he's talking about, where Harriet went to on her first stop in Liberation when she ran to see Sam Green. You'll see that church. It still stands today.
Wow.
She didn't know that prior to. Did she know that prior to?
She knew. Around here, the most historic black families around here are Baileys, Greens, Baileys, Greens, Rosses. I don't know how many Tubmans are left. I personally have never met an African American with the last name Tubman. But a lot of them changed their name to Still. Not Still, Stewart.
Okay.
Like if you go up to Auburn and you look in the graveyard where Harriet Tubman's family is buried, you'll see a lot of Stewarts. Those are former Ross and Tubmans. So here's another one. How many of you know that if Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman were alive today, they'd be cousins?
Wow.
Runs in the family,
Just
that
for the
blood.
camera, can you say that one more time?
How many of y'all know that if Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman were alive today, they would be cousins? Actually, to be truthful, they've been cousins. I mean, even though they've passed away, they've been cousins for a very long time. Because the families all have intermarried and intermingled. My grandmother's maiden name was Green. I have a cousin who's a Bailey and a Ross. Several cousins who are Baileys and Rosses. All the families have basically absorbed one another. If you look, I don't know if y'all have been to the birthplace of Frederick Douglass in Talbot County, but the only thing that separates Talbot County from Dorchester County is the Choptank River. Which you cross to go from Talbot into Dorchester. And quiet as it's kept, Cambridge started off as an Indian reservation, which was we'll be here all night. Which Cambridge was sold in order for Maryland to pay its portion of of creating Washington D.C. So they broke the treaty, which is what they do, and they sold Cambridge, which was an Indian reservation. And in the last few years, they've taken down the plaque that showed that the state plaque, the big iron one. There was one that if you're going westbound on 50, you come across the Bay Bridge. I mean the Choptank Bridge, right there at the foot of the bridge on the Dorchester side. It had the whole history of Cambridge being an Indian reservation. They dug it up. So, I guess in some semblance in some ways you can say that abolition on the Eastern Shore for African Americans was like a family affair. If these woods could talk. Here's another thing. Don't you keep an eye out for when you're in Maryland and you go down these old country farm roads and stuff like that. You ever look out and you see a field like this one here, this big field with corn and everything, right? And then you'll see a row of trees or a line of trees in the middle of the field. And you wonder, why did they knock that down? Those are most of the time those are graveyards. A lot of them are slave graveyards. It's in the deed that they cannot knock those trees down. Wow. Some slave masters had a habit of they bury slaves and then they plant trees over top of them because they didn't want anybody coming back and digging them up. In which case, that hinders us today because because I mean I don't know how much of those bodies will be left for DNA, but a lot of us have missing family members, and I think the law in Maryland is that if there's a graveyard of your family members, that the people who own the property have to make a legal effort to allow you access to visit the graves of your family members. Now, why is that important to us? Because a lot of us are descendants of slaves. And if we can find where they are buried, we have the legal right to visit those grave sites.
Not slaves, enslaved. People that were enslaved.
Yeah. Freedom deficient.
Yeah.
Okay, so now here's the nasty part of that. I speak for my family. When my family was taken from West Africa, taken to Barbados for seasoning, and then brought up and to the what we call the Middle Passage. It was a slave port in Oxford, Maryland, which is 10 miles from Easton. We were purchased by the Skinner family and taken to what was called the Skinner Plantation. Now it's called Fairview. Some German family. They're like the Murdochs of Germany, and they're very very rich. The original house is still there. Well, no, it's not the original house. For the first one mysteriously burned down, but the centuries old house is still there. And then they built another mansion on the property. And you know what they did? They dug up the slave master, moved his grave, built the mansion on top of my ancestors. Didn't move the Africans. Built this elaborate estate on top of the grave. So my family, if we want to go and visit, if you ever looked at a lot of people like to look up the Bailey family in the Maryland archives, whatnot. Look at the first individuals who came from Nigeria and Cameroon and stuff like that. And there's a guy. Our first ancestor's name was Baal, and it was Baal and Salah and a few others. They built a mansion on top of their graves. So if we want to go visit our ancestors, we gotta go sit in their dining room. But a lot of these people that own these properties where you'll find your ancestors buried have a lot of money and have a lot of political connections, especially in this area. These plantations are going to upwards of $30 million a pop. As a matter of fact, the guy who owned this particular guy that I'm referring to, he's recently passed away. His son has everything now. But he had so much money that he didn't think he should have to fly into BWI in his private jet. He didn't want to fly to BWI and have to drive the traffic all the way down to Eastern Shore. So he paid for Eastern Airport to extend their runway to accommodate his jet. Wow. So, I mean, I don't know if any of you young people like have religious parents or religious elders, that like because I know when I grew up I had elders that they like to quote Bible scriptures. But when you hear it's we fight against principalities and spirits of the air and all that kind of stuff, whatever. There's some we fight against some real strong, connected people when it comes to stuff, and this is why it's very important that these books like these. Every time you see a history book with a black face on it, pick it up and absorb everything you can find in it. Do not let the work of your ancestors be in vain or be dissolved. Because if any time that you say I don't want to learn this about your history, whatever, just imagine this. Anytime you say, "Oh, I don't want to buy that," or whatever, just imagine a flame starting. Somebody just lit a match. You're lighting matches to your history where you come from. You're lighting matches and you're setting fire to who you are. Every time you say, "I don't want to learn this," I don't care what they did. If I was born back then, I would have done X, Y, and Z. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. It took special individuals, the bravest of the brave. Like now, we have the most talented of the talented. Back then, there was the bravest of the brave, like Reverend Nat Turner. Who knows who that was?
I don't know Nat Turner.
Y'all don't know who? Y'all know Reverend Nat Turner?
No.
They
don't know who Nelson Mandela is.
Have you seen the movie Birth of a Nation?
No, they hadn't.
They haven't.
But they